Hey guys, we made it to week 4. We are going to finish To Kill a Mockingbird this week, and I want to start by kind of emphasizing that this week we're going to be looking at literary terminology. So we're going to be looking at allusion, simile, foreshadowing, mood, tone, those sort of things. We've discussed them before. But again, the literary terms don't really go away. So we're just going to kind of expound upon them today in light of To Kill a Mockingbird and just kind of see how they lend to appreciation of the literature as well as a deeper understanding of what's actually going on. Because in some cases, we have to depend upon the textual clues to really read the events. And chapter 29 is pretty straightforward, but as we get to 30 and 31, it's going to be a little bit more confusing as to what's going on. Also, I just realized this is chapter 28. It's not chapter 29. So let's clarify that real quick. Okay. With chapter 28, it's more straightforward. The rest of them have a bit of ambiguity as we kind of have a bit of a mystery to solve as to what happened. And some things are implied subtly that we're going to have to decode and try to figure out. I've had a lot of students confused, like, wait, who did what and what's being covered up? And so we'll get to that. With chapter 28, the different themes that we'll be covering specifically will be, or the literary terms, simile, symbolism, mood, and circular plot. This might be a new term for you, so we will discuss that together. All right, so basically a summary of the chapter. I really encourage you to read these chapters on your own because they're exciting. There's a lot that goes on. It's kind of interesting to figure out, like, can you spot the subtleties and try to piece together what's actually happening. So read them, please. And this is sort of to be supplementary after you read or to help with clarification. Okay, so what happens in the chapter is that the kids are walking to school for a play. The play is sort of like a harvest, Halloween, Thanksgiving all-in-one type of play. They're at the school, they're going to have a carnival. Each of the classrooms have different activities set up in them, and it's a fundraiser slash all the community is going to come out and they're going to be putting on a play about Macomb County. And each of the children have a different part. Scout's part that she's supposed to play is that she is going to be a ham. Yes, a ham. So it's like a chunk of ham. And her costume says ham on it. It's chicken wire, which is just kind of like a fine wire that has little hexagon kind of shapes in it. And that's the foundation. And then they've paper mache'd on the outside of that with some type of like a fabric cloth that kind of the color part on the outside. So she's wearing like a cage. And the costume is really important, so we need to kind of keep that in mind. There's a little hole right here you can see in the middle where her eyes can poke out, but otherwise she is quite unable to move when she's in her ham costume. So the kids are walking to school initially, and they hear a mockingbird singing in the tree. And the mockingbird, as you know, can iterate or depict different sounds. And so it says specifically, as they're walking, they hear the mockingbird and it's chirping. And I'll get to that section for you because it mimics 3 different sorts of birds. And I want you to try to understand what that is symbolic of. So it says, if you're reading in this version that we all have, well, we don't all have, but it's online in this version. So on page 342, it says, high above us in the darkness, a solitary mocker, so that'd be a mockingbird, poured out his repertoire in blissful unawareness of whose tree he sat in, plunging from the shrill kee of the sunflower bird to the irascible quack of the blue jay to the sad lament of the poor will, poor will, poor will. So that would be the whippoorwill. And that's it. So they're walking by and there's a mockingbird in the Radley tree and it's making these mocking sounds. And one of the questions I have for you to answer for homework is, what does that symbolize? So again, if we talk about symbols, symbols are something that stands for something else. The mockingbird is not mentioned simply because, hey, there's a mockingbird in the tree, but it's supposed to stand for something. Who might it stand for that is echoing or mimicking different characters in the text? Yes, we'll get to that. So that's the first thing that happens. As they're walking to school, it's also dark, it's shadowy. They're a little bit frightened. We'll talk more about setting in just a minute. So they get to school, and the play occurs after they have some fun at the carnival. But Scout actually falls asleep in her costume, and when she falls asleep in her costume, she doesn't hear her cue and she's not able to come out. At one point, there's a loud sound and it wakes her up and she runs out on stage, but it's long after she should have been on stage. And it kind of interrupts the play, and her teacher says that she ruined it. Why does she fall asleep in her costume? What is the significance of that? What does her delayed entrance sort of foreshadow? If you think about it, why is she able to fall asleep in her costume on a stage in the middle of a play? It's to show, I mean, scholars have argued that her costume is so limiting to her, that it's almost like this little cocoon that keeps her from being aware fully of the world around her. And it's as if, kind of symbolically, she is herself always inside of this cocoon of innocence, this cocoon of childhood, where she can just fall asleep, and she can just rest, and she has this little tiny like hole that she can peer out of and see the world, for all of its evil and all of its kind of adult lack of innocence, I guess. And through that experience, we see that the costume itself symbolizes Scout and who she is. It puts that external representation of her reality. So, be that as it may, that's kind of what's symbolized through that action. Further, as they leave the school, the children are walking back, and she's in her costume. She can't see anything. Jem is having to lead her again. When she's in that cocoon of childhood, she needs people to bring her along because she can't see enough to do it on her own. She needs protection. She needs guidance. That goes along with themes we've been talking about, again, with innocence and childhood. And then they're attacked. They hear footsteps behind them. They stop. Jem is kind of like, I hear this, and then suddenly the footsteps don't stop. It rushes at them. Jem shoves her out of the way, but the man pounces on her and squeezes her. At one point, he chokes her, and tries to slash through her costume with a knife. So her costume also protects her. So her costume is not only a representation of her innocence, but it's also that her innocence is sort of a protective garment around her, and it keeps her safe. And after the attack, there are noises of strangling and wheezing. There's the scent of alcohol that she can detect. All of these are illusions. Illusions would be sort of like something that leads you to think of something else. It's a reference to something else that when you put the pieces together, you're like, oh yeah, that reminds me. So we know that there's only one alcoholic in this book that we know of, and that would be the Yules. And so that's an illusion, kind of a callback to something we've already seen in the book. Strangling and wheezing. Who has strangled? There's only been one strangling so far in this book, and it was Mr. Yule. Mayella says that Tom Robinson strangled her with his hands, but as we know, it wasn't Tom Robinson that did it. It was her father that strangled her. So we have, again, a callback to his actions to kind of help us understand that it was him, Mr. Yule, that did that. And then lastly, with the closing of that scene, there's a circular plot structure. So pushing on, with the setting, it shows proximity to, it all kind of takes place apart from the school in proximity to the Radley house, by their gate, by the tree, by, these are scenes we've seen throughout the entire novel. The mood is foreboding, it's imaginative, it's sensory, it's dark. Scout's light is contrasted with the darkness. So on her costume, there's painted sort of this sparkly, bright white, iridescent paint. And Jem remarks on how it reflects the light. So Scout, in her little bubble, she's kind of humming along inside of her innocent cocoon, not recognizing that there is actually a danger and a threat to them. It's an oxymoron where that means you have like an extreme contrast between one thing and another. And so she is light in the darkness of the setting that they're in. Excuse me. It's suspenseful, and the circular plot element simply means, and I have another slide on this later, but it comes back to something that had previously been mentioned. So they mention the haunts again in this chapter, and that hasn't been mentioned since the beginning. There's also the tree that they mentioned with the knot in it where Boo had put the little treasures for them. It also marked kind of the edge of the Radley house, the Radley property, as far as they were willing to go. Also, we see character growth, the expansion of Jem's bravery, his sense of protection, his sense of reason, and his sense of awareness that prior, 4 years earlier, he was just a kid like Scout, getting himself in trouble, being in dangerous situations, not recognizing fully the seriousness of evil and danger. And they both were a liability to each other, whereas now Scout is the only one. As we continue, a couple ways that the main characters are highlighted in this section. So we have Scout, she's innocent and oblivious. Jem is alert, he's a protector, and he's not innocent of evil. I'm going to scoot this over so you can see that. Boo, he becomes the ultimate guardian of the children. So while on one level Jem is protecting Scout, Boo is protecting both of them. It also shows that Boo is aware of human cruelty. And when he hears the children scream, it's not just like, oh, I wonder what they want, or oh, they're just being kids. He assumes kind of the worst and comes out prepared because he understands the world that they live in. And then finally, there's Mr. Yule. He is drunk. He repeats his violent act. There's no sense of justice or value for life because in his math, if you want to say it that way, a public defamation of his character, where he said that basically Atticus made fun of him in front of everyone, that a public defamation of his character should necessarily result in 3 deaths. So Tom Robinson, and now he has no qualms about actually killing and hurting Scout and Jem. He brings a knife and he does hurt them. So those are the characters in this section I wanted to review. Here is our conversation on circular plot. I think this image is helpful because what it shows is that in the same way that life is cyclical, the book, it begins in one place and it ends in one place. And there's all these connections, if you look at each of these strands, that connect certain events to the other events. So at the beginning, we have like the mockingbird, and the kids are told, like, you never shoot a mockingbird. And then it comes back at the end. Another thing that we see is all of these little strings about Boo Radley, different things we learn about him. At first, he's a monster and he eats squirrels. And now he's like the greatest hero in the book as a whole. We have Mr. Yule, who is a white man and has like so much more social worth and social standing than anyone else, but at the same time, he is worthless and he's taking the life of others. So again, there's all of these connections, meaning that the book ends up in a similar place where it began, just at the Finch's house in their living room, talking about the Radleys, and yet the characters are at a completely different place than they were when they began. 2 more things I want to talk about in this chapter, and then we're going to talk about the point of view as well as sort of the iconic nature of Scout and her ham costume. And I'll save that for the next video with my comments on chapters 29 through 30.